Hello. First video I've done for you in a while. But today the conversation I wanted to have is about change being scary, right? We all know this. We all know this idea about change being scary. But how does this relate to grief and change being scary? And maybe not in the way you think. So, the biggest reason why people get stuck in grief and the biggest reason why people heal is not who died, when they died, how old they were, their relationship to you, as much as it may feel like that's why you're in the grief you're in. In the long term, that's not why. The main reason is around your beliefs and whether you want to be out of grief or not. And you may have heard me talk about this before. I talk about it a lot. One of the big things is our beliefs around grief that society's given us. So as a very simple example, there's a lot of bullshit out there about that grief is love or grief is a measure of your love, right? Now, very simply, if you believe that, why would you, deep down, you're not going to want to be out of grief? Maybe not even deep down, maybe right here at the surface you recognize you do not want to be out of grief, because if your grief is love, well, you're not going to want to give that up. Of course not for someone you really cared about. You don't want to give up your love. Therefore, you won't want to give up your grief. And if you believe your grief is a measure of your love, like i.e. how much grief you're in reflects how much you love the person, well then no matter how much you say you don't want to be in grief, or how painful it is, or how much you wish you weren't having these feelings, again, you're not going to want to give it up, because what would that mean? If your grief is a measure of your love and you are going to dissolve your grief and then be without it, what does it say about your love? So beliefs like these, which are not true, these are absolute myth, very prevalent but very insidious myth. So that's one of the ways that we get stuck. Another is our own personal beliefs. So it could be, that grief has become a purpose for you, that grief has given you access to a community. Maybe there's a community that you're part of now because of your grief, i.e. a grief community. Maybe there's been purpose in it, that you've started a charity or something like that, or it's brought closer connection to someone else. It may be that grief is what you blame your problems on. Anything that's going wrong in your life, well, it's because of the grief you're in. Anywhere you're not progressing in the way you'd want to, whether it's, in a relationship or meeting someone or business or whatever it is, well, shit, it's because of the grief I'm in, right? So we can get stuck because of those own personal things of ours as well. But also, and here's the change is scary part, that to our ego, change is scary. To our lizard brain, to that, they talk about the reptilian part of the brain, change is scary. New and different is scary. So the most primitive part of ourselves just wants to keep us safe, right? So the most primitive part of yourself, the most primitive part of your brain doesn't give a damn for your dreams and your hopes and where you'd like to end up. All that cares about is keeping you alive, and it made sense way back when we were cavemen running around, and cavemen and women, cave children, going into an unfamiliar environment posed more danger. Being in an unfamiliar community posed more danger. You didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know who was there. You didn't know what animals or dinosaurs or whatever just around the corner waiting to eat you. So an unfamiliar environment was more dangerous because you didn't know the terrain, right? So, change, because of that part of us, there is always this part of us that just wants things to stay the same. We like the familiar. And if you don't think that's true, consider, why do people stay in a shitty job they don't like? Why do people stay in a shitty relationship? Why do people stay in a city or a country they know they don't want to be in? Why do we stay in friendships with people we've known from school even though we don't align with them anymore, even like them anymore? Because we don't know what happens on the other side of that. If I leave this relationship, then what? At least I know this, it's not that bad. If I go to another country, then what the hell? So we will stay in all sorts of situations that are not good for us, that are not going to help us reach our dreams, simply because the unknown is scary, right? That's why change is scary, because it's about the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen next. You walk through a different door, metaphorically, a different door into a different life. You don't know what's through there. Not totally. And that's scary, and that part of your brain does not want you to go in there. Right, so that change is scary. Now, how does this come into grief? What am I talking about with grief? Because one of the reasons we can get stuck in grief is that it becomes very familiar very quickly. And we don't know what's on the other side of that. What happens after we heal, right? And that can be scary. That can be a reason that people get stuck in grief. The more that has become a part of their life, the bigger the risk that is. So where I've seen it in the past in particular, a really good example is when some of the women I've worked with who've had a husband die. And if their purpose was very closely linked to their husband, and indeed if they didn't have a lot else going on, maybe they didn't have their own strong social circle, they didn't have their own career. What can happen is they can take grief on as an identity very quickly. And then this whole change is scary comes into play, where they don't want to give up their grief. They don't want anything to do with the other side of grief, because it becomes a very familiar place for them to be. And what the hell would they do the other side of that? This idea that without their grief, maybe they're expected to go out and live their lives and forge a new life for themselves. And, it can be sometimes just the simplicity of the idea can seem counterintuitive. Like, why wouldn't anybody want to be able to be free of pain and go forward and make different choices? Because they're scared of change. They're scared of change. Like I said, why do we get stuck in some pretty terrible situations for us sometimes, but we ride it out because we know it. Better the devil you know. And that's how this, the risk in this change is scary thing. I remember working with someone years and years ago, not in the grief capacity and other work I used to do, who had become kind of by default a carer for her family. She'd cared for both parents before they died, and then went on to care for her brother, who was very unwell and becoming older as well. And I always remember, I never understood it at the time because I hadn't been through what I'd been through and healed and done the work I'd done then. But she wore her grief like a blanket, like there was something very comforting in it for her. And she made a big show of it. She told everybody, you wouldn't be able to have a conversation with her without hearing about these deaths in her life, but that had become the safe place she lived, because for her, on the other side, the change out of grief would have been far too threatening. She didn't have her own career, she didn't have her own family, and she was older herself. She didn't have a strong social network. So the question on the other side of that would have been, well, who the hell am I, and what am I going to create, and what do I even want? Which in that case was just far too threatening. Her grief was very familiar, and it was a place she could stop and she could live. And change out of that would have been far too scary. So it's really just about recognizing that. I think it's, we all like to get caught in the trap of pointing to the things in our life that are to blame, and the people in our life who are to blame, rather than, and it can take a bit of humility to have to go, okay, I've got to be really honest with myself about what's going on and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and what I'm afraid of, and just being aware of that and not getting caught in that trap. And I described it to someone the other day. I said, that part of yourself that just wants to keep you right where you are, it's not bad. It's not your enemy. You don't need to fight it. But just understand it's not really that useful for you. Its job always has been to keep you alive and to keep you safe, and that means staying in the familiar. And I described it as being like an old aunt of yours. And this old aunt of yours, she's never travelled. She's never done anything really. She lived a very normal life, maybe, not really all that satisfying, but just did what she was meant to do. And she doesn't understand. Why would you move to a different city? Why would you even move out of your neighbourhood? And why would you consider, leaving your relationship? The person you're with they're nice, aren't they? They come home to you at night. They don't hurt you. They help to pay the bills, Why would you need to go off and do a different job? The one you've got is fine. Everything you need is right here. It's that kind of mentality. Think of it as this old aunt who really is just thinking about what's best for you, doesn't know what's out there in the world. Everything's scary, In the next town, well, that's where everybody gets raped and killed. And God knows what happens in another country. You just stay. Your parents live just down the road and, well, your job, they've been good to you, haven't you? You'll have a job there at that firm for the rest of your life. Just stick with it. It's that mentality, that part of your brain that does not want to change is like that old aunt. Not ill will towards you at all, not an enemy, not that needs fighting, but you don't need to believe it. Just be very aware that that aunt is coming from a place of love, but she doesn't know what's right for you. And she is going to keep you in a tiny little life to keep you safe. Just like that part of you that doesn't want to change, certainly doesn't want to change in big ways because that's threatening. Doesn't mean you're an ill, not your enemy, loves you, is just trying to keep you alive, doesn't know what's best for you, isn't going to help you achieve any of your dreams. Just wants to keep you in your own little place where you are right now, no matter how shitty that little place might be that you're living in, just wants to keep you there. So it's just about being really aware of that, just catching yourself and being aware where you're settling. And you might be doing this in any area of life, but I'm specifically talking about it in terms of being stuck in your grief. But you could be doing it in any area of your life where there's something better out there for you, or at the very least, you don't know what's out there, but this isn't great. And just not to let that fear catch you, because you can heal. Stop listening to all the voices out there. Stop reading the articles. Stop reading the grief books. Stop listening to everyone who's been in grief. Stop listening to the counsellor or the therapist or even the most enlightened spiritual teachers who on any level are trying to tell you how to manage the grief that they believe you'll have forever. You can heal. You can heal. It is within your power to do this. I've done it. I've worked with lots of people and helped them do it, and you can do it too. If you want it. If you want it, then it is yours no matter what anybody says. All right? That's my usual reminder. Lots of love. Talk to you again soon.